Good day, students. Welcome to today's lesson. Today, we will be looking at the philosophical basis for ethical communication. So here is an outline of what we will be looking at in this week's lesson. So we will begin by basically trying to understand how ethics, values and ethics impact communication. And as we go through, we would look at specific examples. We would also explore various aspects or various perspectives that can affect communication. We look at each one in turn, and we look at examples to understand its application. And the third point, corporate social responsibility and ethics, that objective will be achieved in this week's activity. So let's begin. We're looking at the impact of values and ethics on communication. So all professional decisions or decision making, involve some kind of ethics. So our decision making needs to be guided by an ethical framework. Lies can cause a lack of trust and undermine our integrity. So the way in which we communicate in whatever setting that may be, organizational, personal, or whatever, the way in which we communicate, we must reflect a level of trust to those we are communicating with. Otherwise, our integrity can be compromised. They would not trust us because they see us as unreliable individuals. In the workplace, shoddy work can also jeopardize the safety of others in the workplace. And this is also an issue of ethics, because it means that poor work ethics will also undermine your ability to communicate as well. For example, if you have employers who show little concern for the occupational safety and health of their employees, they will have lack of trust in you, and therefore nothing you say would be taken seriously. Success in any organization or project depends on the trust of various parties. So all various levels within an organization. In order for that organization to succeed at its mandate and its mission, all parties must have a level of trust in the work and the responsibility of the others. So let us look at ethical foundations. What is foundations built on? What is ethics built on? So trust is the foundation upon which ethical practice is built. So, and different things can inform that level of trust. So we would look next at what some of those different issues or different elements that can affect level of trust. So ethics, first one. Ethics, a set of rules that describe acceptable conduct in society. We more or less describe this as descriptive, because oftentimes we find that this would be documented in books or manuals or even papers for particular groups of people. So this is of critical importance to professions that serve society, because professionals such as doctors, lawyers, engineers, property and facility managers, they provide a service that can affect our welfare, our well-being, our very safety, health, etc. They develop professional codes of conduct that establish professional standards for behavior. So this is a framework that's usually documented, that's why we call it descriptive, that guides the behavior of these various professional groups. Values, these are the acts, customs, and institutions that a group of people regard in a favorable way. Values are essentially the things that we place importance on. So values are what really matter most to us. For instance, family devotion, respect for the environment, working hard for a day's pay. These are common examples of values, and the things that you value are usually the things that you would give the greatest attention to and put your greatest energies into it. Therefore, these are the things that you will prioritize. Morals. So remember, we're talking about all the things that can affect the level of trust. So morals, these are a set of rules or mode of conduct on which society is based, and we categorize this as prescriptive. So morals do not consider a person's personal preferences. This is more on a societal level, all right? So society will determine what is right and what is wrong. This is applied to everyone, everywhere, and is recognized by everyone as necessary. It involves considering the well-being of others. All right. So whereas ethics that we just looked at, you can have professional codes of ethics. Ethics can vary by the environment or by a professional industry or sector, whatever the case may be. So ethics may be customized to that particular need. Whereas morals, on the other hand, is more widespread, is more far-reaching, and is applied to everybody within a particular society. Now we move to the next ethical foundation. We look at integrity. Integrity is adhering to that moral code in your daily decision making. So we just talked about morals. So morals, as we said, is your ability to know, not only know right from wrong, but integrity now is connected to that in the sense that this is now your ability to act in accordance between this knowledge of what is right from wrong. So when people and businesses possess integrity, in other words, you're doing the right thing and not the wrong thing, it means that you can be trusted. Persons and businesses that lack this quality mislead their customers, they misrepresent information, and can often suffer the consequences of their lack of integrity. So when there's a lack of integrity, misleading customers on a particular service or product now, the customer themselves could suffer. And then of course, if the customer suffers, your business will suffer, or your business mission, organizational mission will suffer. Character. Character drives, I beg your pardon, what we do when no one is looking. So there's no one over you with a big stick telling you, do this, don't do that. Your character is what defines who you really are. So each of us has the ability to build, change, or even destroy your own character. A person with character has high morals and will act morally in all situations by choice, not by force. So in other words, when nobody's looking at you, you will still do the right thing. This is an example of a mature person, a person with a mature character. Person with character or mature character will honor his or her commitments. If you say you're going to do something, you will do that. These qualities can also be applied to organizations. So when you talk about character, you can not only talk about it on an individual level, but you can apply the concept of character even to an organization. Is the organization doing what is right at all times, even when no one is looking? Laws, the next point, next foundation. This is a series of rules and regulations designed to express the needs of the people. Laws protect people from the most blatant and despicable affront to morality. So remember, we've already identified in morals, identify right from wrong in a society. Oftentimes, we have people in society who do not have the character maturity in order to make the right choices. This is where the law will step in. So the law is what will, how should we say, enforce a certain level of moral behavior in cases where you have crimes, violent crimes such as murder, rape, theft, etc. The law, and you find that the law always has a strong connection to morality, ethics, and values, in the sense that the law will actually be built around those accepted norms in society. It is important for us to note, though, that not all laws are ethical. And I'm sure at this stage, most of you understand that there are times that the law may seem to be unjust. But one of the things that we have to understand, though, is that oftentimes laws are not even drafted and enacted until a problem arises. So this is where oftentimes we would find that the law falls short when it does not address particular, shall we call them, immoral issues. I beg your pardon, I'm just trying to make sure I'm on the right slide. Right, so organizational ethics now. So organizations can develop code of ethics to address their unique operational situations. So remember, we were talking about code of ethics earlier. So every organizational setting would be different based on their mission and their mandate. So by developing a code of ethics, an organization makes it clear that employees and members cannot claim ignorance as a defense for unethical conduct. However, it's important to note on that point that if you have a code of ethics, that information needs to be communicated to everybody in the organization. So you cannot hold people responsible for ignorance or claims of ignorance if the information has not been made available to them. Only at that point can you hold them responsible for violating what they know. So these code of ethics, they help employees to strike a balance between the ends and the means used to obtain them. In other words, not only what they produce, not only what the end means are, but how did they get there? What was their behavior in achieving the goal? Unethical conduct of just a few employees can affect an entire organization. You know, the saying, one bad apple spoils the whole bunch. That's what we're talking about here. So just a few persons can ruin the reputation of an organization. So in cases where these codes are repeatedly and grossly violated, the public's likely response is to demand protective legislation. So this is where you would find external forces now having to be brought to bear on the company as in response to the violations. And this is where you may find complaints may be taken to industrial courts or other legislative entities. Additionally, it is therefore better for professionals to police themselves rather than to be subject to outside judgment. All right, so organizations have to take some responsibility for managing these kinds of situations in order to keep employees and other members of the organization in line. Now let's look at some ethical perspectives in communication. So the first one we look at is religion. So values is a major determinant in the development of culture, which has a significant role to play in communication. Right, so the culture of not only a nation or society, but even within your organization. Values, remember we looked at values before. Values, those are the things that are important to you. And of course, different situations can influence what becomes important to you. So what we're saying is religion is one of them. So these values can influence culture in both verbal and non-verbal ways, not only in terms of what is written and what is spoken, but in the way we behave. If you think about it on a societal level, culture might be in terms of our art, our music, the food we eat, the way we eat it, all of these things, because many of these things can be symbolic of certain things that we value and certain things that are important to us. So due to the extensive variation in religious practices and beliefs, people can have different ideas and opinions of what is appropriate behavior, and that can impact on different group communications. And this becomes even more challenging when you are in a multi-ethnic environment like ours. Different groups can have different values and they communicate differently. For example, the things we talk about will often determine what we value, what is important to us. And think about it even on a personal level too. You have some people that they love to talk about TV and movies. That's what's important to them. Someone else, if it's a religious person, they love to talk about their religion. Someone else loves to talk about sports. So these are the things that are important. Other questions you may ask: what amount of physical touch by non-family members is appropriate? So in some cultures, you find that that is not appropriate at all. Not even the shaking of hands with somebody who is not a family member, particularly when it comes to men and women. What appropriate time off from work to attend religious gatherings during the week, during the work week, what is acceptable and what isn't. So it all depends on what, in this case, what is the organization value in terms of religious obligations. Sticking with religion for the moment. So depending on your religious backgrounds, people may approach communication in the workplace differently. For example, specific words or phrases may be prohibited, such as saying the name of a deity in an irreverent manner. Some cultures or some religions will actually even wage war based on these kinds of judgments. Additionally, examples: unfamiliar or new religious terminology and vocabulary. So if you are in a work setting or even a societal setting where you encounter persons of different religious persuasion, some of the terminology and vocabulary would be different. Some religious factions may dissuade the use of social media as a means of preserving one's modesty, or access to material that would lead to impure thoughts, or to avoid potentially inappropriate conversation between non-married or unrelated individuals. A simple example, some religions, and sometimes not only religions, but sometimes individuals may take sometimes an extreme perspective on their own religious beliefs. For example, somebody might just decide, I don't want a television or radio in my house at all because it is evil. It will expose my children to evil. All right. So these are some of the things that might happen with regards to religious perspectives. Right. So now we're going on to the legal perspectives. So some aspects of organizational communication are regulated by law. Other forms of communication can lead to harmful civil litigation. For example, when you consider things like issues like libel and slander, those are forms of communication that can often trigger litigation, persons suing one another, organizations suing each other, libel being the written communication, slander being the spoken. It is therefore important to understand the legal consequences of business communication. So let's look at some legal issues, especially within the business context or the organizational context. So we have product or service disclaimers. You'll be familiar with some of these concepts. So these protect businesses and organizations from potentially harmful litigation in the event of misuse or misunderstanding by customers related to a product or service that the organization provides, right? So this is usually very clearly labeled somewhere, can be communicated on packaging, advertisements, or sales conversation, and disclaimers can be used in court as evidence. All right, so once the disclaimer is properly articulated, in terms of the use of the product or service, customers don't really have a legal complaint there. Then we have legal disclosures. These are similar to disclaimers, but they are less specific. So the disclaimers are specific, whereas disclosures are less specific. For example, a conflict of interest disclosure for certain persons, stock analysts or financial advisors. Sometimes you find they may find themselves in a situation where they have to give a disclosure of conflict of interest, maybe some project they're involved in that it appears that they can financially benefit from it. So they may have to withdraw themselves from the particular project, and they will have to give a conflict of interest disclosure. All right. Next point, non-disclosure agreements. They are different from disclosure agreements. So in these agreements, a party agrees to refrain from sharing proprietary information outside of a contractual relationship. So if you sign a contract with another party, any information that becomes available to you within the period of that agreement, a non-disclosure agreement in the contract can actually make it illegal for you to share that with any outside party. So if you violate that, you can get into legal trouble. So another perspective on communication, ethical perspective on communication, we now want to look at utilitarian. So these are ethical views. So the utilitarianism is an ethical theory that determines right from wrong by focusing on the outcomes. So they're not so much interested in the processes involved in you deriving a decision as to what outcome should be, but it focuses on the outcome itself. So this thinking holds that the most ethical choice is the one that will produce the greatest good for the greatest number of people, for example, number of participants or stakeholders in a situation. Doesn't necessarily mean that everybody would benefit, but you're looking at, relatively speaking, at the greatest good. It is the only moral framework that can be used to justify military force or war. We do not know for certain what the effects or outcomes of our action would be. Would they be good or bad? And quite frankly, any decision that we make in life, it is impossible for us to know what the exact outcome would be. We do the best we can in assessing the situation and making the decision based on the information that we have. So this ethical approach has trouble, though, accounting for values such as justice and individual rights. And this is what I meant in that earlier statement I made when we came to this slide, is that because the focus is entirely on the outcomes, you don't look at all the factors that can be leading up to that final decision that will have an outcome. So you're not really addressing, is it just? Do all individuals have the same level of rights, etc.? Right. Okay, so we're on the next slide. Continuing with utilitarianism. So we have two types of utilitarianism. We have act and we have rule. So act refers to the theory that a person's act is morally right if and only if it produces at least some measure of happiness or good, as any other act the person could perform at that point in time. The rule, the theory that an action is right if it leads to the greatest good. Now I have an example here that that I want to share with you. I need to come out of the slideshow screen if I can. No, unfortunately, I cannot come out of it. I can't remember it off the top of my head. But essentially, what we're saying is our rule is simply this. It's right or wrong. That rule has been established, for example, through laws in a society. your reasoning through it. Doesn't matter how much good or what level of good. It just simply is black or white, right or wrong. Whereas ACT now, on the other hand, looks at degree of happiness and the particular situation. Did anything happen in that at that particular point in time? So it's kind of relative. All right. So ACT is kind of relative on a personal level. In other words, if the action I took, did it affect anybody in a bad way? If it didn't affect anybody in a bad way, well, it's not really a big deal. Whereas rule now, if I cross that red light, I know it's wrong because the law says it's wrong, even though nobody was affected because I drove through the red light in the middle of the night, there was no traffic, it was wrong. Whereas ACT, on the other hand, will consider the effect that it has on somebody else. Right? So in the social media, often persons are allowed to post whatever they want, such as political or religious views, and they often come under attack for their views, resulting in cyberbullying. Right? So this type of situation now, this makes a compelling case for the rule utilitarian approach by imposing rules for the protection of individuals as well as the media host. So you establish these rules because, quite frankly, you don't really know what type of communication and information people will post out there, and even the media for that matter. So this is why we often find that this kind of utilitarian rule approach will often be applied here. So this often serves to be the case for conventional media as well. So not only social media, but also like television, radio, newspapers, etc. So consider how the impacts of ACT and rule utilitarianism can operate in the case of media communication during the COVID-19 pandemic. What is happening out there? How has the media communication been used for good and for bad, and how would the ACT or the rule approach be beneficial or destructive? All right, so that's something you want to consider. Right. Another perspective, universalist, right? So one distinctive understanding, I beg your pardon, one distinctive understanding of universalism is ethics. In ethics is that ethical principles are principles for everybody. So this is universalism, it's for everybody. They describe the responsibilities or the obligations of everybody, as well as define the rights of everybody. So, and it lists virtues for everyone as well. Virtues would essentially be the goalpost or the yardstick by which you are to be measured in terms of character. Advocates of universal principles see this as a merit. They see equality of requirement and entitlement as ethically important. So that's rights and responsibilities equal for everybody. For example, discussions of universal human rights emphasize not only that all humans have rights, such as right to food, right to shelter, right to education, rights to clean water, if we think about some of the various sustainable development goals, etc. But for universalism, what is key here is that all have the same rights. There are no differences. Doesn't matter here. They say it doesn't matter your level of education, your level of income, geographic location. None of these things should affect your rights. It is believed that unethical communication can threaten society and counter civility in everyday conversations. So if you subscribe to universalism, if your conversation, I beg your pardon, if you do not subscribe to universalism, in this case, you may find that your conversations may reflect such that can cause distrust and maybe even anger, angry responses from those who receive your communication. So professional communication ethics, such as the media, seek to accomplish the following. They seek truth, to minimize harm, to remain independent, and to not hold themselves accountable. Now, that's the ideal. Oftentimes, we find that's not necessarily what's happening. Certainly, of course, they always seek to not hold themselves responsible. But again, everything is relative out there. Another principle, a similar code of ethics are often applied to environmental professionals with a focus on the human and natural environment. And of course, here again, I make reference to the Sustainable Development Goals as an example of a universalist approach. Then there's a humanist. So the humanistic approach is a philosophical tradition and value system that takes the human individual as its starting point, emphasizing the uniqueness and inherent worth of human beings. So in other words, everything revolves around the human being, right? It considers the human being as having inalienable rights, independent from any of the characteristics, ethnicity, nationality, social status, gender, etc. So none of their rights should be dependent on that. The notion can also be extended to the care for the natural environment, as it is essential for human flourishing and our very well-being. So basically the concept here is, yes, there is some recognition that there is an interconnection between human being and the environment, but the importance is really placed on what is the effect of the environment on the human being. All right, so again, this is just another perspective. Now, the first priority of this approach in any crisis is to protect stakeholders from harm, not to protect the organizational reputation itself. So again, remember the focus is on the human individual. So that would be represented by the stakeholders, the individuals in the organization, not the organization as the environment. Information communicated at times of crisis, you find that communication would instruct persons what they need to do to protect themselves from threat, physical threat or any kind of threat. So information such as need for food, medical care, rescue, financial assistance, etc. in times of disasters, how is this communicated? You find it's communicated not only by the media, but also by managing authorities. You find this is where agencies such as ODPM, Ministry of National Security, Ministry of Local Government will step in to communicate information that would be important in the protection of the individual persons. All right, now the next perspective in communication is dialogic. So the dialogic theory refers to a set of principles and beliefs about how to engage with others using interpersonal communication and conversation. So dialogue starts from the assumption that various interpersonal communication features are necessary for people to have rewarding, honest and meaningful interaction. So those communication features that we're talking about was risk or the risk of some kind of threat between the individuals communicating. Do you feel comfortable? Do you feel safe? Is there a level of trust between the parties? Is there a level of commitment to do what you say you're going to do? Mutual interest, ability to collaborate and work on the same goal, empathy for each other. Do these features exist in order to promote a rewarding communication experience? This approach consists of the application of formal communication principles designed to minimize power held by individuals and organizations. You want to involve all participants in the conversation. You don't want to have, say, a meeting where 2 or 3 people just controlling the entire meeting and other participants have no opportunity to voice their concerns or views. So all views are respected and all opinions are respected in this particular communication perspective. So our dialogic ethic assumes that everyone involved in the issue is important and has a unique perspective that should be valued. So everyone and everyone's opinion and views is important. You find that this particular approach is particularly emphasized in the context of public consultations. I beg your pardon. So we have one more to look at. We have the situational. So this perspective, situational communication. So this approach takes the position that moral decision making is contextual or situational, it's dependent on a set of circumstances. It holds that moral judgments must be made within the context of the entirety of the situation, and that all normative or normal features of a situation must be viewed as a whole. So you can't look at one particular thing and isolate that as giving the greatest weight to the situation. If you have various variables to look at, you have to assess them all as a whole. So what we're saying, in other words, that there is no one size fits all rule, since each situation should be evaluated on its own merits. All right, so this is where you would require that you have decision makers who are ethical, who have mature character, and people who are moral, because when you have to give them that kind of authority to make a decision based on the situation, you need to be able to trust that they have the ability to do so in the benefit of all and to do so in a just manner. So a guiding framework for situational decision making is stated variously as that of acting in the most loving way to maximize harmony and reduce discord, and also to enrich the human existence. So our religious example of this is if one holds to the absolute wrongness of abortion, then one will never allow for abortion, no matter what the circumstances within which the pregnancy occurs. All right. So that's an example of how, how decision making can be a very complex issue that you have to take everything into consideration. So in summary, communication is a very complex issue that affects every area of our lives. With the increase in global communication technologies, the issue of communication ethics have been brought even more to the forefront. So we ask the following questions. How do we manage ourselves, not only with regards to the accuracy of the information that is delivered to the public, but also how do we do so in a responsible, humane manner that does not cause harm to individuals or groups? Consider various forms of media or organizational communication, how they have failed in meeting these needs. So for today's lesson, for this week's lesson, you are referred to the Unit 4 resources link on your eClassroom page for additional reading and information. As before, much of what was covered in the lecture today, additional details would be provided in that resource. And then you are also referred to the activity for this unit, where the last objective would be covered. So you are being asked to evaluate a short video case study on the issue of communication ethics. And each of you will be required to complete a worksheet that was designed specifically to summarize that case study. All right, and that worksheet would be evaluated. Okay, thank you for joining me for today's lesson.